All right, folks, we're back. Now we're going to talk about different types of Agile models. The first one we're going to talk about is one of the oldest ones. It's called Extreme Programming, or XP for short. This came out of a set of projects actually at General Motors. A guy named Kent Beck was hired to finish it was a payroll project that had gone on for months and months and months and months and months, and was completely bogged down. And so they hired Kent Beck to fix it, and he implemented this extreme programming model and ended up having the entire project done in like half the time they thought it would take him, and with many, many fewer bugs. So this was like the very first big success for XP. Okay. So, and Kent Beck did this sort of circa 1995. It's useful for small teams, about 10 people. In fact, that's exactly the size of Kent's original teams. It relies on heavy customer involvement. In fact, it requires that the customer be on site and be a part of the development team. It relies on continuous unit testing. It's a technique called test-driven development and reviews. The idea is that when you start a task, remember from the last video, when you start a task, the first thing that you do is write the tests. And now all the tests will fail because you don't have any code for the tests, but that's okay, because your implementation of the task, you will know it's complete when all the tests pass. And that's the idea. You write the tests first, the tests all fail, and you write the code so that until you get to a point where all the tests pass, and then you know you're done. XP also requires pair programming. We've all seen pair programming in CS1 and CS2. This is the same kind of thing. 2 people, 1 computer. You switch places every half an hour or so. One person is typing and writing code. The other person is looking over their shoulder, thinking about testing and design issues and looking for small bugs. XP uses short release cycles and frequent releases. Their definition of short is usually a month to 6 weeks or so, but that's actually getting shorter as time goes along. So features of XP: planning and project management. Is when user stories are written. You make frequent small releases, which are called iterations. That's your schedule. The planning game starts iteration. The planning game is where you look at the remaining requirements, you prioritize them. Requirements are user stories. You prioritize them, and you then start breaking them down to pick the ones that you're going to use in the current iteration. This is why the customer has to be there, because they are the ones that tells you which of these user stories are the most important. A stand-up meeting starts each day. This is also typical of most other Agile models, because what you do is you keep track of where everybody is at the beginning of every day, so that you know quickly if you're starting to fall behind. Designing. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. Remember I said simplicity was one of the practices of Agile stuff, and it's really all over XP. Refactor whenever and wherever possible. Refactor means that you will change the code to simplify the design. And you're allowed to do that whenever you are working on a piece of code and you think it's gotten too complicated. Coding. The customer is always available, so you can always ask the customer questions about implementing a particular task. You code the unit test first. All production code is pair programmed. In an XP shop, you are not allowed to write code on your own. You have to pair program everything. In fact, there's a rule that says if you write code on your own, it is not allowed to go into the product. You throw it out and rewrite it with a pair. You integrate often. Every time you pass a unit test, you integrate so that you're integrating constantly. Integrations can happen dozens of times a day. There's collective code ownership, which is what I talked about earlier as well. It's the team's code. It's not your code, which means you can look and work on anything. Another interesting feature of XP is no overtime. Actually, the rule is you can't work over more than 40 hours a week, 2 weeks in a row. So you can work overtime 1 week, but you can't do that the next week. The idea is that the more you work, the more tired you get, the less productive you get. You have a life outside of the project, and you should live it. And that actually makes you more productive. Testing. All code must test all unit tests before it can be integrated. When a bug is found, new tests are created. Acceptance tests are written by the customer, and they're run whenever you're ready to integrate. So that's pretty much all I'm going to talk about in terms of XP. XP is actually a little bit rigid, and it's not used as much anymore. The next one that we're going to talk about, Scrum, is by far the most popular Agile methodology that's used in development shops these days. So it's an Agile process. It uses short iterations to develop incremental products. There are only 3 roles in Scrum. There is the product owner, the Scrum Master, and then the team members. And that's it. It's a very flat hierarchy. In particular, the Scrum Master is not the boss. The Scrum Master is the Scrum expert who is there to facilitate things for the team and to guide the team through the Scrum process. And the product owner is there to basically tell the team what are the most important things to do, and also to do all of the acceptance testing. So Scrum requirements are characterized by user stories. So user stories look something like these things. So as a user, I want this particular feature so that I can do something. Or as a something, I want to do something so that some value is created. These are the kinds of things that you will see in user stories. These are how user stories are typically written. There, of course, all of those things are filled in, but this is the kind of thing that you see. This is the idea behind eliciting requirements and getting the users to tell you what they want. So artifacts, things that a Scrum process produces. A product backlog, which is the list of all of these user stories that the product owner has created. It's typically only the product owner that creates the user stories. And the product backlog is where they all live. Then there is the sprint backlog, which is these are the most important user stories that are left in the product backlog, and these are the ones that will fit into the current sprint. And as part of the sprint backlog, as part of the sprint itself, there's also things called a burn chart and a task board, which we'll sort of get to. And then finally, of course, there's the product. So how Scrum works. It's characterized by something called a sprint. Sprints are typically 1 or 2 weeks in duration. Originally, they were 30 days, but that's gotten a lot shorter recently. The Scrum Master runs daily Scrum meetings. I call them stand-up meetings. And during the Scrum meeting, what you have to do, what every person on the team does, is answer the 3 questions. And the 3 questions are, what have you done since the last Scrum meeting, which should be yesterday? What got in your way? Did anything get in your way? Did a person get in your way? Did a lack of software get in your way? Did a tool get in your way? Did your hard drive die? What got in your way? And then what are you going to do between now and the next Scrum meeting? So every day, everybody stands up. Everybody answers the 3 questions. Oh, by the way, you stand up at these meetings because it makes them shorter. Okay. So rules about the sprint. Total focus. No unwanted diversions are allowed. In particular, once you start the sprint, nobody can give you additional work. It's just not allowed. You have what you are tasked to do for the sprint, what the team is tasked to do for the sprint, and that's the only thing you work on. So there are no interruptions or changes allowed from the outside once the sprint has started. New work can be uncovered by the team, but it usually doesn't go into the sprint backlog. It usually goes into the product backlog. And it might not be added to the sprint backlog, but lots of times it is. So how does the sprint work? So before the sprint begins, or actually just as the sprint is beginning, you have a planning meeting. And in the planning meeting, the team members go through the product backlog. The product owner tells them the priorities of all of the user stories. They pick the user stories that are the most important. They break them down. They try to estimate how long it will take each one. They know how long the sprint will be because all sprints are the same size. And so you can then estimate how long each task will take, and once you get to the length of the sprint, you stop. Okay. While the sprint is going on, the stand-up meetings are every day, usually very first thing in the morning. They usually last only 15 minutes or so. In the middle of the sprint, you have story time where you reevaluate what you've done. The product owner can talk about whether there's any other stories that they might want to add to the sprint. You reevaluate things, although typically you don't add anything. At the end of the sprint, you have a sprint review, which is basically a demo of all the software that you have written during the sprint. And then you have a retrospective after you do the review. And the retrospective is you look back on the sprint and you say, is there stuff that we could have done better? Do we want to make any changes in how the team is operating for the next sprint? And then you loop back around to the planning meeting and start the whole thing over again. This is just basically how to implement Scrum in 10 easy steps, which we've talked all about. I'll let you look at this for a second, and then I'm just going to move on. So question. Again, another one we'll talk about in class. Which do you think is a more effective process, XP or Scrum, and why? Think about that, and we'll talk about that in class. And that's it for now. Talk to you later at the next video.